I'll begin by just introducing them, and then they will each have a turn to present to our audience this evening from their area of expertise. So tonight we have Stephan Astourian. He is the William Saroyan Director of the Armenian Studies Program at the University of California, Berkeley. Stephan is also an Associate Adjunct Professor in Armenian and Caucasian History at the Department of History at UC Berkeley. Along with Stephan, we have with us Aram Hamparian, Executive Director of the Armenian National Committee of America. In this role, Aram serves as the organization's point person with the presidential administration, Congress, the media, and the Washington, D.C. foreign policy community. Thank you both for being here this evening with us. So we'll begin tonight with Professor Astourian. If you can please present to us this evening, again, from your expertise as a historian, as director of the Armenian Studies program at UC Berkeley, helping us gain some context around current events in Armenia. Professor?
Yes, first I would like to thank the San Francisco Bay Area ANC for inviting me and for organizing this event. Let's start with the region where this event took place. That is the Armenian province of Tavush. Tavush is actually a beautiful province. Some people refer to it as Armenia, Switzerland, and so on. Apparently, there are lots of Switzerlands in the world. It is located to the northeast of Armenia. Further north, there is Georgia. And to the east, there is Azerbaijan. And from Azerbaijan, you reach Georgia. So it's a kind of triangular corner between among the three countries, located in the northeast. Tavush has three small cities: Ichevan, Dilijan, Noyemperian. The rest is made up of small and medium-sized villages. Why am I saying that? Because the region, the specific region where the conflict took place in Tavush is precisely made up of a series of villages. That area has about 12 villages, 4 of which were directly facing the Azerbaijanis, very close to the, let's call it, demarcation line between the Armenians and the Azerbaijanis. Those villages were Chinari, Verin Garmirahpur, Movses, and Aykebar. There was also another one, Pert, that was involved in these events. Okay. Second point, in addition to the geography, the fact that in that area there is no agreed upon border between Armenia and Azerbaijan for understandable reasons. You know, as soon as the Soviet Union started crumbling down, before even that, the Karabakh conflict had started. And thus, there is no official post-Soviet border that is agreed upon. However, there are the borders of Soviet Armenia and Soviet Azerbaijan. Okay. The conflict actually took place in Armenia itself, because in 1990, 1991, Azerbaijanis captured some areas located in Soviet Armenia and early post-Soviet Armenia, and Armenians took some territories located in Soviet and post-Soviet Azerbaijan. So the current demarcation between the forces is not the borderline that existed in Soviet times between Armenia, the Republic of Armenia, Soviet Republic, of course, and Soviet Socialist Republic of Azerbaijan. I have read quite a few articles by the so-called think tanks and so on, parroting. It is enough to do a quick search on Google and you will get the impression that actually Armenians attacked Azerbaijani territories. The fact of the matter is that that is just not accurate. The conflict took place on the only thing that has legal value today, in the absence of a post-Soviet agreement on boundaries, okay, the Soviet Armenian territory. Now, the first question, once you have this broad context about where things have been happening, is, as usual, who started these clashes. Naturally, if you read the reports again by the think tanks and so on, it would seem that things just happen. Nobody starts actually. Apparently they start together, or I don't know how it happens. The idea is that there is no responsibility, clearly pointed responsibility, and it's a same trick usually with the so-called Minsk group that has been dealing with the resolution of the Karabakh conflict, you know, over the past decade and even longer than that. Okay, they never state clearly that you know, the Azerbaijanis started it, or the Armenians, or the Chinese, or somebody. No. So here we have to ask the question, who might have started it? As a historian, I like hard evidence that can be corroborated, preferably that I can see very clearly. Since I don't have a couple of personal satellites, and one of them was not flying over Tavush that day, I cannot be 100% sure about who started the events. However, a number of pieces of circumstantial evidence tend to point quite clearly towards Azerbaijan. The first is that after the April war, April 2016 war, Armenia has asked for monitoring devices along the boundaries of Karabakh and Armenia to be installed by the OSCE, the Organization of Security and Cooperation in Europe, of which the Minsk group is a subgroup dealing with Karabakh, the Karabakh conflict. There were two meetings in May 2016 after the clashes, the conflict of April 2016 in Vienna and St. Petersburg, where that agenda was on the table. Armenia agreed to the installation of monitoring devices. Azerbaijan was lukewarm, and then they disagreed, and so on. So that tends to point to the fact that the aggressor usually doesn't want the monitoring devices. You know, that's, it's unlikely that the aggressor will insist that he wants to be seen, you know, absolutely, you know, starting the conflict. There is another source. I had printed it out. I have to find it again, but it's a very serious Russian website dealing with aeronautics and things like that, which clearly stated that it was the Azerbaijani incursion with a jeep or something, you know, towards Armenian positions. That was the key moment that launched the clashes. And then there is a statement by the Azerbaijani ambassador in Moscow, Mr. Polat Bulbuloglu, who, while interviewed, you know, stated that it doesn't matter who started the conflict. You know, that's not what's important. Let's deal with other things, occupied territories and so on. Now, it is very unusual for a top diplomat, because for Azerbaijan, I mean, to be the ambassador in Moscow, the only equivalent positions are ambassador in Ankara and Washington, you know? Okay, these are the three main places. So one must assume that Mr. Bulbuloglu is not the weakest diplomat in the Azerbaijani diplomatic corps. And his answer is telling that he says that issue is irrelevant, even if we started it, it doesn't matter. And then there is the more general issue based on all the previous clashes, most of which took place around mountainous Karabakh, the Republic of Karabakh. It is quite clear that since approximately 2014, there is a pattern of keeping tension alive, in various places. Usually it's in the Karabakh area or the territories that Karabakh forces took over. But similar clashes took place also around Tavush in the past, smaller ones. So this is nothing new in Tavush. It is quite clear for somebody who observes those events, and because of my job, I teach the Caucasus. I have to follow a little bit every day. The strategy is what the Chinese would call the death by 1,000 cuts, is to keep little clashes here, bigger clashes there, a little bit more intense one there, and to create a sense of utmost danger that the conflict is going to spill over. When I was interviewed by Al Jazeera prior to the interview, is this going to lead to a regional conflict and so on? And of course, the think tank reporting reportings I have read over the past week and more, they all go in the same direction. The danger, the Fourth World War might start, or the fifth one, out of these events and so on. It's very dangerous. So my sense, again, it's not absolute certainty, because as a historian, I really would like to see satellite picture, monitoring device evidence, and so on. But the overall pattern tends to suggest that it's Azerbaijan. Now, the strange thing is why again in the region of Tavush? That is interesting, and it's not absolutely clear. I have heard sources saying because there you have Armenian villages directly facing Azerbaijani troops, and thus they can be damaged. I don't know. One thing I know, having visited Tavush, in various areas, Armenian positions are really way above Azerbaijani positions. They are overlooking them. In this specific area, it tends to be the opposite. Okay, that is, Azerbaijanis are overall on higher grounds. So that might explain why this particular part of Tavush and not, for example, the ones I have visited. But then that leaves the question, why now? And why, if Azerbaijan started it, why attack Armenia itself? That is a matter of informed guess. If you listen to Armenian sources, Azerbaijanis might have been incited, by Turkey. That could be. Again, we don't have the hard evidence. I'm speaking as a historian here, okay, to say this is this cause and not that cause. It can be a number of causes, including, for example, testing the resolve of the Commonwealth Security Treaty Organization. That is the kind of defense organization around Russia, and members of the Commonwealth of independent states are, most of them are part of that CSTO. That could be the case, but then the conflict didn't become so intense as to test really whether they will do something. Okay, because in this case, the Tavush events, it is not a war. It is not very intense clashes. The adequate word in English would be skirmishes, but it's a kind of special type of skirmishes in the sense that very advanced weaponry was also used, such as unmanned aerial vehicles, you know, UAVs and so on. But there was almost no physical contact between the troops. It was mostly artillery, you know, those unmanned vehicles and so on. And the casualties, when you look at Armenian casualties, the last soldier died on the 27th of July. There are 6 dead and about 35, 36 wounded. The Azerbaijani official casualty numbers are dubious. They state they have 12 deaths, almost no wounded, which is outright impossible. And then there is another event which is telling. The first day, Azerbaijan claimed that 2 of its soldiers were killed. And the former defense minister, Rahim Ghaziev, made the mistake of announcing that actually 12 people had been killed the first day of the conflict. He was immediately detained and is likely to be in jail now for treason, revealing state secrets, and so on. So if the first day of the conflict, on July the 12th, you know, there were 12 killed, it's very unlikely that by July the 22nd, nobody else was killed, when we know that there were many casualties at a given moment that have been videotaped by Armenian troops. So this is the situation. The conflict starts on July the 12th. It lasts approximately up to the 16th. And the most intense day is the 14th of July. So it's a very short time span. Then there are the usual shootings, firings, sniper firing, and so on. And on the 22nd, Azerbaijani troops try to capture an Armenian position, in English, the fearless position, Anvakh position. And that's where they got a lot of casualties that were filmed, actually. You can see them, you know, because later on, the Armenian troops allowed them to be collected by their Azerbaijani colleagues. So I would say really approximately the real clashes 12 to 16, then simmering, you know, skirmishes with intensification on the night of the 21st and the 22nd. And since then, some sniper fire shootings and things like that. So a very compact event without the involvement of thousands of troops. But on the 22nd, to capture that Anvakh position, that fearless position, they brought in troops trained by the Turks called Yashman troops. And the result was not ideal for Azerbaijan. They didn't do well, and there were many people, many of them were killed. Okay? So this is the overall picture of the conflict. The media made much out of the fact that an Azerbaijani general, Polat Hashimov, I think, and Colonel were killed. Armenians lost a mayor and a captain, all among their officer corps. Azerbaijanis lost also 2 or 3 mayors. You call it majors or mayors in the army here. I don't know. In France, it's commandant. So overall limited casualties, and the Armenians shot down 14 AUVs, including one of the best, biggest Israeli AUVs, Elbit Hermes something, you know. Azerbaijanis have claimed that they shot down 1 or 2 Armenian UAVs. So this was a new type of war with advanced technology, but overall little physical contact between the troops. What are the results? Because I know I have 20 minutes at most, and I have my watch here. I thought I wouldn't talk that long, actually. The main results from a tactical, strategic point of view is the fact that Armenian troops were able to capture a position on top of a relatively small, it's not a mountain chain, it's more a hill, but it's large, you know, it looks like a chain. And that position is, I have seen many photos of it, is quite strategic because it overlooks the whole area leading toward Georgia. In particular, that area has strategic significance because there is an oil pipeline, the Baku-Tbilisi-Jihain pipeline going through that area. There is the Baku-Tbilisi-Kars railway. There is a gas pipeline going there, and there is another one that is going to go there. The place is known as the Ganje corridor. So the military result is essentially that one. And it appears that on that small chain of hills, you have also Azerbaijani positions that are there and that are cut from Azerbaijani troops. That explains apparently why Azerbaijanis try to attack that fearless Armenian position. You know, it might have been to regain communication with their brethren on top of those hills. Now, a few words about reactions, right and left calling for ceasefire, discouraging war, and so on. Bellicose rhetoric on the part of Turkey, that's the only exception. Brotherly feelings towards Azerbaijan, assurances that we are going to help you, and so on. The Western media, I mean, it's essentially think tanks and then people in the press who don't know too much. It's the attitude I have presented. Nobody is clearly guilty. They are dying to have peace there. They are peace-loving people. And after the Azerbaijani threat to blow up the Armenian atomic power plant of Medzamor, suddenly Azerbaijan revived the theme that Armenians intended to disrupt our gas pipeline, our oil pipeline, and immediately this was echoed in the think tanks, you know, possible major disruption to our oil, our cherished gas. You know, this is terrible. This is really impossible. And I have seen similar comments in another country's media that supports very much Azerbaijan. So suddenly, ex post facto, the nature of the conflict started, and it was reimagined as an Armenian attempt to capture those pipelines and so on, to disrupt them, and that is outright intolerable. Internal reactions, they are notable only in Azerbaijan. In Armenia, there is no particular reaction, except some people in the opposition try to raise some problems, but no, it's nothing significant. They have been doing it for about all kinds of events. corrupt priest, genocide museum, and so on. It's every day there is a new theme emerging there. It's essentially in Azerbaijan, it's quite interesting. On the night of the first day of the conflict, there was a demonstration. Demonstrations took place in various cities, essentially anti-Armenian, but the one in Baku with 10 to 30,000 people, depending on the observers, that's the data we have got. So it's a substantial demonstration. Quickly degenerated into an anti-government demonstration with attempt to seize the parliament, calls for the resignation of the defense minister and other things, and it was promptly repressed thereafter. Second consequence, internal consequence in Baku, in addition to the fact that Rahim Gaziev was detained because he said 12 people were killed the first day, on July the 16th, the foreign minister Elmar Mamedyarov was forced to resign. He's not the first one. There was a vice minister for defense also that was forced to resign. And my impression is that there is a kind of internal power, not power struggle, because Aliyev and his wife are very strong, but it's like a cleanup time where the Pashayev and Aliyev clans are getting rid of the old timers, of people who started serving under Father Aliyev, you know, and constituted really the backbone of Azerbaijan, okay? They are getting rid of those, and maybe that's to prepare the emergence of Mrs. Aliyeva as the future president of Azerbaijan. She is the vice president, as you know, officially, and to avoid all the snakes from destabilizing things when she comes to power or something of that kind. It's hard to know, but the overall process is there. That is quite clear. Now, why could they have started this conflict at the time when it started? Maybe it's to deflect from the internal problems of Azerbaijan. The economic situation is bad. As you know, few people now are driving. Gas and oil, you know, are not doing too well in the international markets. The price has gone south. That is a problem in the long term for Azerbaijan, in the medium term even. There is also the COVID situation that is mostly covered up in Azerbaijan. Its intensity is not quite revealed. There is this potential internal cleansing of people. And in this context, doing what they have been doing under this Aliyev, this President Aliyev, Ilham Aliyev, that is deflecting hatred towards Armenians and Armenia, made full sense so far as I am concerned. As for the question, is the Third World War going to start? Will there be a conflict between Russia and Turkey and so on? My view is not because of these events, and that these are pure fantasies of people who have made it a business to imagine big crises so that they can be paid as supposedly think tank specialists. And that's it for my talk.
Professor Astourian, thank you very much for that insight, providing that timeline and the context for the current events in Armenia and kind of what's happening and why, and some of the ideas behind what's driving all that. So thank you very much for your comments and your expertise. Thanks to all our viewers who are joining us and continue to join us. I encourage you to please ask questions. There's a chat function. You can do that on Zoom. You can also post your questions to Facebook. We're monitoring both platforms. And Roxanne Makashjan paying attention to those questions, and we'll be having some time for Q&A at the end. But I want to turn now to Aram Hamparian, the Executive Director of the Armenian National Committee of America. It's late there on the East Coast. Aram, thank you for staying up with us all to present from your perspective, really on the front lines of activism here in the United States. What can you share about our community's response here in the United States? What has it been like, and where does it need to go? I think you're going to want to take yourself off mic. Thank you. Thank you, Aram. I think we couldn't hear you there for a second.
Sure. Well, first, let me join with you in thanking Professor Astourian. In order to understand these events, we truly need the type of expert context from the historical context, sort of very incisive analysis of what's going on in the region, in Azerbaijan and Yerevan. So that you have helped, I think, the audience understand the context in which the events of the past couple of weeks have happened, because they're not in isolation. They're part of a continuum. And thank you so much, Professor, for sharing that. I think that's desperately needed in our community, that the type of context and analysis that you offer. So thank you very much. That's number one. Number two, in terms of the, many thanks also to ANC San Francisco, dear brothers and sisters. I'll turn now to just jump right into the Armenian-American response. And I wish I could say that everything that we did was sort of planned out beforehand, but the fact of the matter is that our response was very much shaped by the congressional calendar. As it turns out, I don't think through any effort on Aliyev's part, this attack was launched just a couple of days before the US Congress considered two very large, very important must-pass bills. The first, and I'll talk about that first and second, the first is the Defense Authorization Bill. I'll touch on that in a second. The second is the Foreign Aid Bill. And both provide a lot of opportunities for us, but also for folks who don't agree with us and folks who, work for Azerbaijan and Turkey here in this town. The Defense Authorization Bill saw three amendments that we supported very strongly that were introduced to this defense bill. Two of them were shot down to our great regret. One of them was by your local Congresswoman, Jackie Spear, a very strong amendment about locking in the level of Azeri and Armenia military aid. We cannot get that one through, but we'll do it next time. The second was an effort by Congressman Sherman from Southern California about Azerbaijani threats to shoot down aircraft flying between Armenia and Artsakh, and how U.S. military hardware, technology, services, et cetera, should not be used for that evil purpose. That didn't make it through, but the Plone Amendment did get to the floor, and it was adopted. And that's, I would argue, a pushback against Azerbaijan in that it ensures strong congressional oversight over the military aid that the U.S. does provide to Azerbaijan, and they provide way, way too much and out of balance with the level sent to Armenia. So the Plone Amendment went through, and that's good news. And we're going to do our best to make sure it stays in the Senate version, gets passed into law. And that will allow us, it'll give us leverage, information, a powerful platform from which ultimately to take down this U.S. military aid program. It's like a precursor amendment that will, part of a longer game that we're playing. The bad news on the defense bill was that the heads of the Turkish and Azerbaijani caucuses got through an amendment, a very destructive, reckless amendment called the Shabbat-Cohen Amendment, put forward by Steve Shabbat of Ohio and Steve Cohen of Tennessee, really hostile characters. And this amendment unfairly seeks, or inaccurately and unfairly seeks, to group the Karabakh issue in with a whole range of other regional conflicts to kind of paint the Armenian side with a broad Russian brush, and to as I said, to present, let's say, the Artsakh issue as similar to the Abkhazia, Ossetia, or Crimea issue. And that's, it's a cheap shot at Armenia. It's historically inaccurate. It speaks to internally displaced persons while making no mention of the fact that hundreds of thousands of Armenians were displaced. Also ignored the fact that almost all the IDPs, the internally displaced persons, were in fact displaced during the Soviet Union prior to the existence of an independent Republic of Armenia or independent Republic of Azerbaijan. It's a bad amendment on many levels. We're going to fight it, and we're working on that nonstop. So that's the defense bill. So we saw the Plone Amendment go through. That was a big, big step forward for us. I think that the fact that we could pass that overwhelmingly in the U.S. House in the wake of this attack, I think sends a message back. The Azerbaijani lobby did their best to take it out. They could not do that. Fast forward to later in the week, this is now last week, we had the foreign aid bill reach the floor. And the foreign aid bill also saw a battle between the ANC, let's say, and the Friends of Azerbaijan and Turkey in Congress. The main battle for us was, again, spearheaded by your local Congresswoman, Jackie Spear, and she brought forth an amendment with many of her colleagues, Democrats and Republicans. We call it the Spear-Cox-Bilirakis-Krishnamurthy Amendment. Long story, it's to continue the aid program to Artsakh, which has come under relentless attack. The State Department, White House, the Clinton, Bush, Obama, Trump administration, none of them have liked this aid program, but none of them went after it the way that the Trump administration did. The Trump administration over the past 3 years has really, at a very high level, been very aggressive to kill this aid program, and we've been just as aggressive fighting back. And it's gone back and forth, between the House and the Senate and the White House. The showdown was last Thursday when the House passed the Spear Amendment, and we're very, very excited by that. We're now working in the Senate to see that aid program go through. The purpose of the aid program is to finish the demining of Artsakh. There was one amendment, a hostile amendment offered that was shot down, thankfully, by Congressman Cohen from the Turkey caucus. And his amendment actually explicitly said not one U.S. penny to remove one landmine in Artsakh. And I don't want to get sort of distracted by that, but I have to share with you that that was as terrible an amendment, as terrible a piece of legislation as I've ever seen. The logic behind it is something like this. This is Steve Cohen now making the argument. If we leave the landmines in the ground in Artsakh, they will do the only thing that they can conceivably do, which is to kill people. Typically a farmer, very often a child. If they're not killed, they'll be blinded. If they're not blinded, they'll lose a limb. And if we see enough death, if we see enough dismemberment, maybe the Armenians will have the good sense to come to the peace table and make concessions. That is, I do believe there are people in Congress and certainly in the administration who think that. The fact that Steve Cohen was willing to put that on paper and submit it to the US Congress is a disgrace to him, but it's a tribute to the Congress and our community that we're able to stop that. So the foreign aid bill saw good progress on the Spear Amendment, good progress on beating the Cohen Amendment. So that was our response. I think it was a good response. There's much more to be done. The drama was last week with 2 House floor votes, but the work continues. Speaking to another point that Professor Astourian raised, very, very, very important point, which is providing accountability or ascertaining blame or identifying who in fact is initiating the aggression. This is a terrible cycle that we've had now for decades, literally. The pattern is something like this. Azerbaijan launches an attack. Azerbaijan denies the attack. The international community, the US, the OSCE, and others offer a generic call upon all parties to refrain from violence. That's the cycle, and ultimately it's a cycle that emboldens the aggressor. Now, there's a couple of ways you can think about it, and Professor Astourian spoke very, very, very insightfully on this exact point. You can look at it from the perspective, let's say the a priori perspective, right? Prior to experience, based on pure reason, you can make a judgment that if there are 2 parties and one party is satisfied with the equilibrium or the current status quo, and the other side is not, you could draw the conclusion that the party that does not like the status quo will be the disruptive party. I think that's a fair conclusion to draw. But then the second question is, well, how do you then prove that? What is the evidence-based approach to that? And we've sought to address that in some ways that are successful, in some ways that are not yet successful. The main initiative that our organization brought forward was the Royce-Engel peace proposal. It was brought forward in October of 2015. It was bipartisan. The heads of the Foreign Affairs Committee, Democrat and Republican, wrote a letter to the then US negotiator, James Warlick, and they said, let's call on all parties to do 3 things, common sense initiatives. First, let's withdraw snipers. No heavy arms, no new weaponry at the line of contact. Right? What do snipers do? They only kill people. They only harden hearts. They lead to the funerals and the hospital visits that don't make peace any easier to find. So that's one, no snipers. Number 2, add the gunfire locators, deploy gunfire locators along the line of contact so that an internationally monitored system can ascertain where the shots are being fired from, where they're being fired to, the nature of the munitions, the caliber, things of that sort. And then finally adding observers, putting observers, so let's see observers on the ground. Now, as it turns out, as soon as that initiative was launched, Ambassador Warlick, on behalf of the State Department, endorsed it. He said, yes, I fully endorse this is a good idea. More accountability is only a good thing. Then Armenia said, yeah, sure, we're happy to have gunfire locators. We'll help you install them, no problem there. Artsakh said the same, but it was Azerbaijan that said, no, we don't want that. They have all sorts of reasons that they say they don't want it, but it's pretty clear to me, I think, and to everyone else, that they just simply don't want accountability. It's, if they had nothing, if in fact they do believe and they want to convince the world that the Armenians are the aggressor, that the Armenian is the side crossing the line of contact, then they would welcome these. And they would say, look, this is a perfect opportunity to prove what we've always been saying. Let's get these gunfire locators in place, and we'll know, you'll be able to prove beyond a doubt that it's in fact the Armenians starting this fight. But they don't. And the answer is, the question is rather why. The answer is, I think, that they're the ones starting the fight. So that's Royce Angle, very, very important initiative. I think when we talk about the peace process, and I'll talk about, I know I'm probably running long, but when we talk about the peace process, sometimes we talk about the Madrid principles and sort of a long-term, big picture resolution of the conflict. And that's a discussion to have. And we can have that discussion about what each side might have to give. But the real peace process is stopping the killing on the ground. The key question to be asked is, when will the killing stop? How can the killing stop? And how can we then take the peace on the ground and translate it into peace at the negotiating table? But we're not going to get there. Armenians will not be bullied or butchered, frankly, to the peace table, right? So when we talk about peace, we can talk about a long-term settlement, but the first thing we need to talk about is Royce Angle and how we stop the killing on the ground, stabilize the ceasefire. There are other points as well. I'll try to cut them short a little bit. There are a couple of pieces of legislation what I'm talking about. The Chu Amendment last year codified the Royce Angle proposal. Prior to that, it was kind of an ad hoc group of members of Congress, about 130 of them, but who supported the Royce Angle proposal. But the Chu Amendment by Judy Chu of Southern California, that turned it into the position of the U.S. House of Representatives, and we welcome that. Congressman Pallone also has a piece of legislation, H.R. 190, for those of you who follow legislation, which would tear down the barriers that prevent dialogue and communication and even travel between Artsakh and the United States. Right now, you may not know that very, very few American government officials anyway, are allowed to travel to Artsakh. I think it's two, the negotiator and his assistant, and members of Congress get, warned off traveling to Artsakh. They get told that it's going to, be the end of the world or something like that. And thankfully, members of Congress ignore them because they're part of a co-equal branch of the government. But the point is that the U.S. government, at Azerbaijan's urging, about a quarter century ago, put in place a whole range of restrictions on the type of dialogue that can take place between Artsakh and America. And for example, Artsakh officials can't visit the State Department. They can visit Congress. Maybe they can meet at a coffee shop, but they can't walk into the building. Why? Our general view is that dialogue is important. The discussions that need to take place are really hard discussions. No one's saying that the U.S. negotiators are going to go to Artsakh and just agree with everything they hear. No, it's going to be tough. In Stepanakert, tough talks. In Baku, tough talks. In Yerevan. But that's how diplomacy works, by people talking. The Azerbaijani approach is just blacklist everybody. They've tried that for 25 years. It hasn't worked. It's never going to work. The Plon resolution, among other efforts, will allow all the parties to talk, and we think we should let America's diplomats, do what they're trained to do. I will close, Samaj, with just the final thought on the Madrid principles, and that is the longer-term plan on the table to settle the Artsakh issue. Start by saying that the OSCE is a really good platform to resolve this issue. OSCE is a balanced group. It provides the Armenian side, but also the Azerbaijani side, the opportunity to sort of present its case. And and I think operates in by and large, a balanced manner, with some complaints. That's what they do really well. They provide a good platform for the peace process, and that platform should continue, should not be moved somewhere else. But the plan they have on the table is really, really weak, and it's something like the Armenian side up front makes concessions of territory, strategic sovereign soil that is irrevocable, like stuff that you give up once, you're not getting back. It's like a done, one and done, you're out. Give the land. And the Azerbaijanis talk about 5 territories, maybe Kelbajar, 6 territory, maybe more than half of Lachin, what they call non-corridor Lachin. Those are all surrendered up front. That's day one of the deal. And at some point down the line, Azerbaijan promises that there'll be a process to determine the final status of Artsakh. Except that their leaders walk that statement back, not after they sign it, right? But they're walking it back right now. Like right now, Elin Suleimanov, the Azerbaijan ambassador in DC, and Ilham Aliyev will say something like, yeah, you will give us the land, and then we will talk about your status. But your status is going to be, and these are their words, not mine, the type of security arrangements that will exist for the Armenian and Azerbaijani communities, the Armenian and Azerbaijani communities of the Nagorno-Karabakh region of Azerbaijan. Just, if you really think that through, that is worth absolutely nothing. It's worse than we had under the Soviets, and there's no comparison to what we have now. So the Armenian side would cede vast territory in order for a promise from Azerbaijan that they will not, I guess, massacre the Armenians who still remain in their sovereign soil. I think that it's an affront to our basic intelligence to even put an idea like that, a plan like that on the table. It's a bad plan. And I think also, I'll close with this final thought, last thought. I think sometimes, and this is a thought I'm developing it with you guys today, and I would love to hear your feedback on it, that the Armenian side and the Azerbaijani side, and I include Turkey and the Azerbaijani side, are playing different games. And I put games in quotes because it's not fun, it's not play. But like in terms of game theory, they're playing different games. The Armenian side, and many on the Armenian side, look to the peace process to deliver peace. That the Armenians have something, whether it's land or security or rights or even just memory. And that the thought is something like, and if we only give some of that to the other side, they will in turn give us peace. And it may very well be that even though we're playing that game, that transactional game, which we hope will deliver for our people what we need to survive, it may be that the other side is not in fact playing that transactional game at all. It may be that the other side is playing an existential game, and an existential game, frankly, that began in 1915 and will end when the work of 1915 is done. And that, if that's in fact the case, then we have to really, really rethink how we're dealing with this issue and maybe prepare ourselves for a long haul diasporan defense of Armenia and Artsakh against some very, very hostile neighbors. So with that, on that dark note, I guess I'll wrap up. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Aram, very much for your comments and your insight, kind of taking us through some of the key pieces of legislation, some of the key proposals that are out there where we can advance ideally and hopefully the Republic of Artsakh's ultimate independence. And yes, it's a dark note, but it's a real note. And I have to say, just on a personal note, while you knock on the doors in the Capitol and you sit in all kinds of meetings and you help us here on our Zoom calls, what's always so impressive is you're also on the ground there in DC. We always see you through social media at the various protests, and you're on the ground literally. And we all appreciate that. And you're also a tremendous mentor to our youth, both on the East Coast and around the country. So thank you very much for your work. Before Roxanne moves towards questions, and Roxanne, I'll give you a minute to kind of pull those final pieces together. I do want to make a few announcements. I figured I'd do this now in between our guest speakers and the Q&A. But I want to make just a few quick announcements for the benefit of our viewers. There are two events that I want to bring to your attention. One is a conversation with Santa Clara County Supervisor Joe Simidian, one of our longstanding Armenian-American legislators, both at a local level and in the state of California as an assembly member and senator. He will be having a conversation hosted by the Silicon Valley ANC chapter. That's going to be on Thursday, August 20th at 7 p.m. Thursday, August 20th at 7 p.m. More information and details to come. You'll find that on Facebook and on the relevant websites. Additionally, and there's registration required for that event. Secondly, as Aram was talking about kind of events in the United States, I think we've all been very aware of the really awful things that have occurred around the country and the world, in fact, when Armenians have gone to protest peace and security in Armenia. There have been regular counter-protests by Azeris, many of them turning violent and aggressive. Here in San Francisco, we have the KZV Armenian School, the only Armenian school in Northern California, and there was no protest at KZV. All our children are at home trying to make the best of their summer vacations and their time off. And in the silence of the night, Azeri and Turkish vandals went onto the campus at KZV and spray painted and defaced the walls and the institution there on Brotherhood Way in San Francisco. It was a terrible shock to our community. And it was in the news, and certainly the ANC local chapter, the school, other community partners, Armenian-American community partners are engaging our elected officials, the San Francisco Police Department, the mayor's office, and all our supporters. There are many elected officials have come out in speaking out against this hate crime and in support, standing with the local Armenian-American community. And we're grateful for that support. But I do want to mention, I say all that to tell you that there will be a rally against hate this Sunday at 3 p.m. at KZV Armenian School. That's 825 Brotherhood Way in San Francisco. It'll be at 3 p.m. and masks and social distancing are required. I know that may sound strange when you're trying to hold a rally, but folks, we do have to take all safety precautions, and we expect that from anyone joining us for that rally against hate this Sunday at 3 p.m. at KZV Armenian School. So those are the two kind of events. And finally, just as an announcement or just a reminder that we are in a census year. The Armenian-American community needs to be counted. So we need to stand up and be counted. And the way we do that is take a very short amount of time out of your day and fill out the census. I believe it's available online. Roxanne, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but everyone should also be receiving regular mailings from the government. Please fill that out. Let's be counted. Let's make sure our elected officials know how many we are and where we are, so that when things like this happen, when there are violent incidents or events where we need to call on our elected officials for support, they're going to listen even more carefully, because they know how big we are, how strong we are, how smart we are, and where we are. So please fill out your census. With that, Roxanne, I'm going to turn over tonight's program to you to finish up with our Q&A. We are kind of getting close to the 1 hour mark. We'll want to appreciate everyone's time, but we will certainly cross that hour mark. We want to make sure we get some of these key critical questions to help continue to inform our viewers. Thank you.
Great, thanks, Sevag. Yeah, that's what I wanted to hear, whether we could go over the hour. And I'm very much hoping our attendees are interested in holding on to their seats as well, because the questions are many and they are very involved, and I'm concerned that they won't just necessitate a quickie answer, but I will try to condense the questions a bit. And if our panelists could also give the most concise answer as possible. It's mostly, the questions are mostly about the battle, the recent battle, and what is the larger political situation there. So so mostly directed towards Professor Astourian. Professor, and forgive me to all those who asked the questions. I will be modifying them mostly just to make them shorter so we can get through them. Stephan, Georg Tertullian asks about these military exercises that are being announced by Turkey and Azerbaijan, and you know, what kind of a threat are those, and what are the possible scenarios for what's going to happen next? What's the future developments that you can see possibly happening over the horizon? Unmute yourself, Professor.
Those military exercises, you know, they have carried out several of them together. This one seems to be quite big. It is clear what message they are sending, but one has to keep in mind that on very short notice, Russia organized massive military exercises in the stretching in its southern area up to the Caucasus, involving 150,000 men, 400 and I don't know how many tanks and airplanes and artillery pieces. That was a very clear message, I believe. The timing, it wasn't something, so far as I know, that was planned a year ago. It was a very clear message to the neighboring countries, especially Turkey, that you know, if things go poorly for Armenia, I mean, they are not going to allow a direct attack on Armenia. Skirmishes are okay. I know there are people in Armenia who attack the CSTO, and indeed the CSTO is not absolutely reliable. It has elements that are very much pro-Azerbaijani in it. But the CSTO is essentially a satellite of Russia. I mean, the key element is Russia. And Russia has a defense treaty with Armenia up to the 2040s, you know, okay? So there were those military exercises by the Russians, and the Turks, in order to show, I believe, some fraternity and so on, have organized their own. I don't view a massive problem there. To me, the key danger in the future, I don't know when that is, the future, in a year from now, 6 months from now, 12 years from now, nobody can predict it, and yeah, it's Nakhichevan, okay? It's not Karabakh, it's not the area of Karabakh. The real danger for Armenia is the region of Nakhichevan, barely a couple of dozen miles from Yerevan, a little bit more than that. This is an area that's on paper part of Azerbaijan. As you know, it's an exclave of Azerbaijan, not an enclave, but exclave, okay? But is today heavily Turkified, with including Turkish military presence there, okay? So the main danger is that one. And so far as I'm concerned, I may be wrong, but I don't think so. And this is a major weakness for Armenia, to have such a territory so close to the Armenian capital. And it's a peculiar type of capital, Armenia. There are very few countries where more than 1/3 of the population lives in the capital, okay? Paris is big, but it's not 1/3 of France. Washington, D.C., I won't even mention it. You know, it doesn't come close to 10% even of the United States. So it's a major weakness. I don't expect, basically, to answer this gentleman, anything extremely significant out of these exercises.
Roxanne, we cannot hear you. I'm sorry to interrupt, but you're still on mute.
Thank you. Sorry about that.
Sure.
Thank you, Stephan. You were able to capture a couple other of the questions that came in, I think, in questions about the likelihood of Turkey getting more involved, etc. Is there, I'll combine two questions. One is, did this, from Professor Dergurerian, is it possible that the Azeris attacked this particular area because of pipelines through there and kind of sending a message to Europe that, you know, the Armenia is endangering their energy supply? And what could be a longer term strategy of the Azeris?
This is a very interesting question, and it pertains to why Tavush, basically. You know, it is, you cannot answer it if you are a historian. If you are a think tank, a great specialist, of course, you are going to answer it. Yeah, it's a major danger and so on. We like evidence. Now, one thing that makes me think that this pipeline had little to do with this attack is the following thing. I have followed the chronology. You know, that's what we do in history. The theme of the pipelines and so on, actually they appear first in non-Azerbaijani think tanks. Western think tanks and Israeli. Okay? Suddenly raising the danger to the Gange corridor, resulting, in the case of Israelis, resulting from the Armenian aggression. In the case of the Westerners, as I said, you know, there is nobody is responsible, things happen, but danger to the Gange corridor. Suddenly, they discovered Gange corridor, okay? Let me tell you something, you know, the same pipelines and road and so on are very close to Karabakh troops. They go near Mingechevir. So the Gange corridor is not the only place where those pipelines and the roads can be endangered by Armenian troops. Okay, so this is the first point. The second point, as I said, is that we cannot, I am not into mind reading. As a result, whatever I say is based on informed assumptions, but no proof. The third point, however, when you look at the chronology, as I said, Azerbaijanis are not saying, gee, they attacked us on July the 12th. It's very clear they want to endanger our pipelines, our railroad, our gas pipelines, and so on. The theme of pipelines, except if I missed something, emerges in Azerbaijani public statements by officials, in particular by Mr. Hajiev, who is the head of the foreign policy department of the presidential administration. His name is Hikmat Hajiev. Around July the 20th or 21st. So that's very late. That's, you know, 8-9 days after the beginning of the conflict. And this theme emerges after the gentleman who is in charge of the press in the Ministry of Defense, Vagif Dargahle, threatens the atomic plant in Armenia on July the 16th. So that didn't sit well. That was awkward to say that. There was a negative reaction internationally, I believe, to that threat. And suddenly they came up with, you know, threat to oil, gas, the energy security of Europe, and so on. So as a result of all of that, Armen, I am not quite sure that they started the clashes there because of that reason. And if they did, then it was totally counterproductive, because these Armenian troops could seize at least part of that Black Rock, Karadash Hill or Sevkar Pelur in Armenia. So in that case, if they did it for that, then it backfired, because they weren't sitting on that position, and now they are.
Okay, thank you. I want to remind people mention to people listening that because of the limitations of time, I won't be able to bring up comments that are not questions, and also topics that don't relate directly to this subject. Let me see here. Oh, maybe this is more for Aram at this point. You know, what can be done to place pressure on Israel to stop selling its goods to Azerbaijan? Is this relationship mean that it's anti-Armenian? And, you know, a comment about whether the U.S. should place conditions on its aid to Armenia relative to this monitoring issue that their Azeris aren't allowing.
Good question. First, let me echo Professor Astourian's comments about Nakhchivan. Absolutely on the mark. Could not agree more. We definitely have to keep our eyes on Nakhchivan. In terms of, yeah, Israel has emerged as a major economic partner and military partner, and even intelligence partner with Azerbaijan. And that's been reflected here in Washington as sort of parts of the pro-Israel community have really gone to bat for Baku. Others have not, and I think that's based on, I think, a meeting of the minds on Turkey, that there's so much shared concern about Turkey that, and this was reflected in sort of late stage support on the genocide resolution from Jewish American advocacy organizations, which we welcomed. But so that there's an element kind of more of the, I would say, hawkish, maybe more right-wing pro-Israel elements that have back Azerbaijan in the city. There's a group called Foundation for Defense of Democracies, which, you know, against their own name, supports the dictatorship in Azerbaijan. So yeah, we deal with that in Washington, and I think that over time, if we're really persistent and very very careful with how we manage this issue, that even the staunchest supporters of Israel will see in Aliyev a future Erdogan, like that Erdogan, who presented himself early on as a friend of Israel, ultimately became one of Israel's harshest critics and worst enemies on the world stage. Aliyev will go in that direction. I think people see the signs of it early on, and we're trying to make that clear to our friends in the pro-Israel lobby.
Okay, thank you. Back to Professor Astourian, Vache Derderian asks, or this question approximately, at what point would Turkey and Azerbaijan be overextending themselves with these kinds of provocative actions and maybe hurt themselves militarily or economically even? Is there a point that it then doesn't benefit them anymore?
That's very difficult to answer because in order to get hurt by doing something wrong, that means reaching the upper limit of Russia's patience or interests and so on. You know, now Russia being Russia, an old imperial country, reformed imperial country, the Soviet Union was like again the continental empire with a lot of nationalities under a new guard, communism. You know. That's the opinion of a lot of historians. Russian diplomacy is extremely deep. It is centuries old. It is like Turkish diplomacy, by the way, and so the diplomacy of some European countries. So my answer is very simple. Azerbaijani-Russian policy needs to go a bit too far to the point where it will become unacceptable to Russia. And except if President Erdogan's, how can I say, a moment of enthusiasm over the past 2 years of extending Turkish influence to northern Iraq, Libya, northern Syria, now Lebanon, generating conflict around Cyprus, then there is gas around Libya, and then there is Greece and so on. That's a lot of tension for one country and one man. I know it works for him because his goal is to excite Turkish nationalism, to attract the ultra-nationalists that used to be Atatürkists. He is creating a Turkish Islamist synthesis, moving from the Turkish Islamic synthesis of the 1970s. Now it's Turkish Islamist synthesis. So creating tension for him, I think, is very good internally. Okay, I believe he is overextending himself in the Eastern Mediterranean and Mediterranean. If he wants also to do so in the Caucasus, I think they have a diplomacy that's deep enough to know the boundary that shouldn't be crossed with the Russians, personally. But then you see, the problem is that things do happen sometimes. Analysts, historians, political scientists assume that there is, rationality in politics. Overall, yeah, let's say there is. But that is not always the case. And for example, the First World War, catastrophic First World War, that saw the end of 3 empires, Austro-Hungarian, Russian, Ottoman. Nobody wanted a war that would last 4 years and a half. When it started, even the way it started was not voluntary. It was a collection of alliances with trigger points. So once the assassination of the prince took place, it snowballed. It got out of control. Okay, and when it started, everybody thought it would last about a month, 4 weeks, 5 weeks. So why am I saying all of this at this late time? Sometimes you assume rationality, and a leader can be irrational, especially when he is a leader like some of the leaders we know. Yeah. So that's why answering with absolute certainty is foolishness, because irrational behavior can take place. But overall, I would say, at this point at least, Turkey knows what the Russian limits are. Turkey has also massive interest with Russia. Not only the military, that's the latest thing, S-400s and so on. Everybody talks about that in the US. Look at the trade between Russia and Turkey, the economic exchanges, and so on. So because of all of that, I think the only way that this type of behavior is going to hurt them is if they create serious problems with Russia. If not, I believe they are going to continue the same way. Same type of clashes, even worse perhaps, will continue taking place. That's what I expect.
Wow. Okay, I have a last question from Stephan Astourian, and then hopefully we can close off with Aram telling us what we can all do. But first, the question, and that is, the global hate crimes that we've been seeing against Armenians in so many different cities. Do you think, and this could be for both of you, do you think this is a real grassroots movement, or is there how much sponsorship by governments or encouragement or whatever do you see in this?
Aram?
Professor, your insights would be more valuable on this.
Yeah, actually, I have written a very lengthy study of how the Azerbaijani state tried to create its diaspora by also controlling the only real diaspora that existed, which was the Iranian-Azerbaijani diaspora. The real diaspora that existed 20 years ago, 25 years ago. It wasn't the post-Soviet Azerbaijani diaspora. There was nothing. They had no organization. The Azerbaijani state first was able to take over the other organization that was made up mostly of Iranian Azerbaijanis, and to centralize the activities of the diaspora. They have a presidential body dealing specifically with the diaspora. And they have done, credit to them, unlike our previous Armenian governments and regimes that for 30 years have done quasi nothing, despite an existing diaspora with major organizations and so on. The Azerbaijani state has been able to create a diaspora that is not a real diaspora. Behind it, behind the few people who are active, there is the government. There are the embassies, there are the consulate generals. So don't assume that Mehmed and Leila, all by themselves say this is intolerable what's taking place in Tavush. We have an Armenian grocer here, we are gonna break his windows. No. That's not, my belief is that that's not how it works. And so my answer again is that there is some incitement and perhaps some coordination.
Thank you, Professor Astourian, for your comments, and Aram Hamparian for answering these questions. Roxanne, thanks for kind of culling those questions together, pulling them together, and presenting to both of our guests this evening. As we wrap up tonight, Aram, I guess I'll look to you, if you don't mind, for a final comment, because we, first of all, thank everybody for attending and listening and learning, listening to the facts and listening to your expertise, both of you, and educating ourselves to do better as Armenian-American activists, to do more. And while we wrap up tonight, I guess I'll leave the final comment to you, Aram, as the one who's on the leading edge of this advocacy work in the United States. What is your call to action for all of us gathered here today moving forward?
Well, first, let me thank ANC in the Bay Area, San Francisco, for pulling this together. It's just one more great event by a wonderful chapter. Let me thank Professor Astourian, a national treasure, and I wish we could have these types of discussions all the time, because I think that it's a great education for our community, and very, very grateful, Professor, that you were able to take part today. On the final thought. I mean, my first thoughts when these, I think like a lot of Armenians, my first thought is for young guys, young girls on the front lines, 18, 19 years old. When I see a death and then I see the year of birth and it's in this millennia, I see this with me. I mean, I literally, like Armenians around the world, are heartbroken that the price of Armenian freedom is paid by very often young men, who some with families, some who have yet to start families. So they're our first army, but they're not our only army. we have a second army, and that's the 7 out of 10 Armenians who don't live in the homeland, but who choose to do something, who choose to be part of the formula that leads to Armenia's survival, who believe that Armenia's viability is their responsibility, their prerogative, who are not simply the consumers of Armenian identity, the consumers of Armenian culture, the food, the music, the camaraderie, the community, which is all wonderful, but who view themselves as producers, of the people who do the heavy lifting. And that's the price of our viability. It has been for a long, long time. We don't have the luxury of a lot of countries of just saying, well, there'll always be in Armenia. No, there won't always be in Armenia unless we're very careful, unless those soldiers fight the way they need to fight, unless we do the work that we need to do. Armenia's existence, even on the planet, is not guaranteed. And if you think about the Nakhchivan situation, think about the Artsakh situation, the Tavush situation, don't want to be alarmist, but Armenia on any given day is just a few days away from being in serious peril because it has some very hostile neighbors to its east and west and some unreliable allies all over the world. So it's a difficult situation. Left to itself, Armenia's in a tough spot. Joined by folks like us, folks like you who are listening, we're a lot stronger. I spoke earlier today to the AYF chapter, the Worcester, I think they're the Aram chapter up in Worcester, Massachusetts, our first community in the US. Our earliest church, I believe, was in Worcester, although the Fresno community might argue that. And I was talking to these kids. They're all like, they're seniors, so they're from like 17 to 25 or so. And I told them we had an educational about Artsakh, and then I said, but I want to point out that what happened last week would not have been possible if your local congressman, Jim McGovern, had not stepped up as chairman of the Rules Committee. If local Armenian leaders in Worcester hadn't built relationships going back 10, 20, 25 years, right, we wouldn't have had that success. The same is true of Artsakh aid. If Jackie Spear had not picked up that torch and carried it very aggressively against some very serious opposition, won't share it on a live video, but serious opposition all across Congress, House, Senate, Democrat, Republican. She was very, very tough, very tenacious, and that resolution got passed because there's a strong Armenian community in the Bay Area, because they built a strong relationship with Congresswoman Spear, because we have a Congresswoman Spear. The same is true of ANCA-SF on the genocide resolution. We would, God bless everyone who put their shoulder to the wheel, but if ANCA-SF had not gone door to door in the House leadership and just said, I am not going to take no for an answer. So the Second Army does matter, but it does make a difference, but it only makes a difference when we step up and do the things we need to do. The easiest way, and this is the first rung on the ladder of activism, is go to anca.org/alert. And all the legislative priorities I talked to you about earlier, you can send letters to your members of Congress asking them to undertake those specific actions. But that's the first step. It shouldn't be your last step. After that, you should be sharing information on social media. You should be following this ANC San Francisco Facebook page, sharing their content on Twitter, on Instagram, telling your kids to join. There's like 1,000 things you can do in the social media realm. And then you get on the phone and call Stephan or call Roxanne and say, what can I do? Invite Dr. Astourian to speak to your community organization. Ask him to help educate people about these issues. It's as they say, knowledge is power, and there's nobody better than your own Professor Astourian in the Bay Area to provide information and enlightenment and analysis on these issues. So the Bay Area has always been a center of high-tide activism. I give Ungar Khadrad, a blessed memory, a lot of credit for that. But his work and the work of so many Ungars over so many years has been carried forward in a very, very admirable way. I'm honored to be able to fight these fights with you guys. So thank you.
Aram, Professor Astourian, thank you so much for this very insightful hour and a half presentation and discussion. It was both insightful, but also very inspiring. Thank you both for joining us. Roxanne, thank you for your participation, helping run the presentation tonight. To our board chair, Mato Senekerimian, who's behind the scenes doing his great work. Thank you, Mato, and to the rest of the board and our local supporters here in the Bay Area, and to the over 200 people that joined us tonight on Zoom and Facebook. We learned together, and we have a call to action to move forward together. We are one nation, one struggle. Thank you for your time this evening. Everyone be safe and take care of yourselves. Good night.